The return. The morning mist clung to the Ramtops like ghostly fingers, and Margot Thorne adjusted her binoculars for what felt like the 1000th time. 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days had passed since Eliza vanished, but Margot's vigil at the observation point never wavered. New Ankh Colony wasn't known for much: questionable architecture, bureaucratic nightmares, and the peculiar fact that extraordinary events had become mundane. The Department of Unexpected Occurrences had a 3-month waiting list, which spoke volumes about life in the shadow of the Ramtops. "Any luck today, Mrs. Thorne?" Barnaby Fitch approached with his cybernetically enhanced fox terrier, Sparky, whose mechanical ear twitched independently of his biological one. "Not yet, Barnaby." Margot kept her gaze fixed on the mountains. "But did you hear that sound last night? Like something breaking the sound barrier while whistling a tune?" Barnaby nodded thoughtfully. "Sounded like Yellow Submarine to me." Sparky thought it was more Bohemian Rhapsody, but his music chip is from last century. Sparky emitted an indignant beep, his tail wagging in mechanical precision. "Whatever it was came from Crystal Cave's direction," Margot continued. "I'm planning to investigate tomorrow." "Crystal Cave?" Barnaby's eyebrows shot up. "That's where they found those strange metal fragments last month. Government types swarmed it like flies." "What government types?" "The kind that wear suits in 90-degree weather and speak into their wristwatches," Barnaby whispered conspiratorially. "Called themselves the Bureau of Terrestrial Anomalies. Load of nonsense, if you ask me. Everyone knows it should be extraterrestrial." Before Margot could respond, Sparky's ears, both biological and mechanical, perked up. The dog emitted increasingly urgent beeps before darting toward the forest path. "What's gotten into him?" Margot asked, but Barnaby was already chasing after his companion with surprising speed for someone who complained about knees older than dirt. Curious, Margot packed her belongings and followed. The path wound through trees whose leaves shimmered with an iridescent blue that had stumped scientists for years, currently the subject of 27 doctoral theses. The path opened to a small clearing, and Margot froze. Standing in the center was a young woman with tangled brown hair falling past her shoulders. She wore a makeshift outfit of leather and metallic fabric that caught light impossibly. Around her neck hung a strange medallion pulsing with faint blue light. But it was her eyes that Margot recognized instantly, hazel with flecks of gold, just like her father's. "Eliza," Margot whispered, afraid speaking louder would shatter the moment. The young woman turned, her face thinner now with a small scar above her left eyebrow that hadn't been there before. She broke into a tentative smile. "Hi, Mom." What followed involved tears, embracing, more tears, and joyful hysteria that registered on seismic equipment miles away. Barnaby discreetly wiped his eyes while Sparky performed excited circles around the reunited mother and daughter. As they walked back toward town, Margot catalogued the changes. Eliza was taller, her soft features now defined by new hardness. Her movements were precise, deliberate, as if she'd learned to navigate a world with different physical laws. "Where have you been?" Margot finally asked. "We searched everywhere. The authorities declared you legally dead last year." Eliza's eyes darted to her medallion, fingers tracing its contours. "It's complicated. I'm not sure you'd believe me." "Try me," Margot said steadily. "After you disappeared, I joined 6 conspiracy theory groups just to cover my bases. Did you know there's a whole society believing the Ramtops are dormant space creatures?" That earned a small laugh from Eliza. "Well, they're not entirely wrong." When Margot's eyebrows shot up, Eliza quickly added, "Not about the mountains being space creatures, that's ridiculous. But about there being more to the Ramtops than everyone thinks." They reached town's edge, where their arrival caused a sensation. News traveled at 3 times the speed of sound in New Ankh, so by the time they reached home, a crowd had gathered. Robert Thorne was still wearing his augmented reality glasses haphazardly when he received the news, having been pulled from a virtual meeting. The reunion was another emotional whirlwind, followed by 14-year-old Theo's arrival, now significantly taller than when Eliza last saw him. Questions flew fast and furious, but Eliza seemed overwhelmed, answering vaguely or not at all, her eyes constantly drifting to the windows as if expecting someone or something to appear. Later that night, after neighbors were thanked, reporters politely turned away, and officials promised full statements in the morning, the Thorne family finally had a moment alone. "Eliza," Robert began gently but firmly, "we need to know what happened to you." Eliza took a deep breath, her hand instinctively moving to the medallion. "The night I disappeared, we weren't just caught in bad weather. Something found us in those caves, something that's been waiting in the Ramtops for a very long time." Her eyes met each family member's in turn. "And now it's awakening." Revelations. The Thorne family living room had never felt smaller. Eliza sat cross-legged on the familiar worn couch, but everything about her seemed foreign, the way she held herself, the constant alertness in her eyes, the strange medallion that pulsed with its otherworldly blue light. "Start from the beginning," Robert said softly, settling beside his wife. Theo perched on the arm of the chair, unable to sit still. Eliza's fingers traced the medallion's surface. "That day in Crystal Cave, we weren't just exploring. Our geology teacher, Mr. Henderson, had detected unusual electromagnetic readings. The official story about getting separated in bad weather, that was a cover-up." "A cover-up for what?" Margot leaned forward. "For what we found. Or rather, what found us." Eliza stood and walked to the window, gazing toward the Ramtops. "Deep in the cave system, we discovered a chamber that shouldn't have existed. The walls were covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly, and in the center was a pool of water that reflected things that weren't there." Theo spoke up, his voice cracking slightly. "That sounds like science fiction, Liza." "I know how it sounds." Eliza turned back to her family. "But when I touched the water, everything changed. I fell through, not into the pool, but through it, into somewhere else entirely." "Where?" Robert asked, his scientific mind struggling with what he was hearing. "A place between places. The beings there called it the threshold realm. It exists alongside our world, separated by barriers so thin they're almost transparent." Eliza returned to the couch, her movements carrying a grace that hadn't been there before. "The creatures that live there have been watching our world for millennia, waiting." "Waiting for what?" Margot whispered. "For someone who could cross over and return. A bridge between worlds." Eliza lifted the medallion, and its glow intensified. "This isn't just jewelry. It's a key, a translator, and a warning system all in one." The room fell silent except for the medallion's soft humming, which none of them had noticed before. "The beings in the threshold realm, they're not hostile, but they're not entirely benevolent either. They operate by rules we can barely comprehend. Time flows differently there. What felt like 3 years to you was more like 3 decades to me." Robert's face paled. "You've been gone for 30 years. In their time, yes. But I didn't age the same way. The threshold realm, it changes you. Adapts you. I learned their language, their customs, their warnings." Eliza's expression grew serious. "And their fears. What are they afraid of?" Theo asked, fascination overcoming his skepticism. "Us. Humanity. Not because we're evil, but because we're unpredictable. We create technology that tears holes in reality without understanding the consequences. The electromagnetic readings Mr. Henderson detected? They were side effects of our own experiments bleeding through the barriers." Margot felt a chill run down her spine. "The Bureau of Terrestrial Anomalies that Barnaby mentioned. They know something's happening, but they don't understand what. They're making things worse, trying to study phenomena they can't comprehend." Eliza stood again, pacing now. "The reason I was allowed to return is because something big is coming. The barriers between worlds are weakening, and if they collapse entirely. What happens then?" Robert asked, though he dreaded the answer. two realities trying to occupy the same space. The results would be catastrophic for both worlds. Eliza stopped pacing and faced her family. I'm here to help prevent that, but I can't do it alone. The medallion's humming grew louder, and outside, thunder rumbled despite the clear sky. What do you need us to do? Margot asked without hesitation. Eliza smiled, the first genuine smile they'd seen since her return. Help me find the others. Others? Theo echoed. I wasn't the only one who crossed over. Throughout history, there have been others, people who fell through the cracks between worlds and returned changed. Most were dismissed as mad or delusional. But they left behind clues, artifacts, warnings. She moved to the window again as strange lights began dancing across the Ramtops peaks. The beings in the threshold realm gave me names, locations, pieces of a puzzle that's been scattered across centuries. We need to find these artifacts before the Bureau does. Because if the Bureau gets them first, Robert prompted, they'll try to weaponize them or study them in ways that could tear the barriers apart completely. The lights outside grew brighter, and Eliza's medallion pulsed in response. The awakening has already begun. Can you see the lights? They all turned to look outside. The Ramtops were alive with shifting, colorful auroras that shouldn't have been possible at their latitude. It's beautiful, Theo breathed. It's also a countdown, Eliza said grimly. Every night, the lights will grow stronger. When they reach the valley floor, the barriers will be too weak to hold. How long do we have? Margot asked. Eliza's medallion pulsed 3 times, then fell silent. 3 weeks. The thunder outside grew louder, and in the distance, something that sounded almost like singing echoed through the night air, a harmony of voices that didn't quite sound human. The first artifact we need to find is hidden somewhere in New Ankh itself, Eliza continued. A compass that points not north, but toward dimensional weak points. Without it, we'll never locate the others in time. Robert stood up, his face set with determination. Then we'd better start looking. As if in response to his words, the house lights flickered, and for just a moment, the walls seemed to become transparent, revealing glimpses of another world existing in the same space, one filled with towering crystal structures and beings of living light. The effect lasted only seconds, but it was enough. It's starting, Eliza whispered, her hand tight on the medallion. The worlds are beginning to bleed through. The Guardian's truth. The search for the dimensional compass led the Thorne family to New Ankh's most unlikely location, the town's historical society, housed in a building so old it predated the colony's official founding. Mrs. Abernathy, the elderly curator, greeted them with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for people who rarely received visitors. Artifacts from the early settlement period, she mused, adjusting her thick glasses. Oh my, yes. We have boxes of items that nobody's quite sure what to do with. Donated by families over the decades. Eliza's medallion had been humming softly all morning, growing stronger as they approached the historical society. Now, standing in the musty basement archives, it practically vibrated against her chest. It's here, she whispered to her family. Somewhere in all this. Theo pulled out his tablet, scanning the room with its built-in metal detector app. I'm picking up some unusual readings from that corner, he said, pointing to a stack of old crates. As they began carefully examining the contents, Mrs. Abernathy chatted about the colony's history. You know, New Ankh was actually the second attempt at settlement. The first group arrived about 200 years ago, but they abandoned the site after only 6 months. Never did find out why. Eliza paused in her search. What happened to the first settlers? Left behind journals mentioning strange dreams and whispers from the mountains. Most historians assumed they were dealing with isolation-induced hallucinations. Mrs. Abernathy shrugged. Though there were some odd findings when the second group arrived. What kind of findings? Robert asked. Structures that shouldn't have been there. Stone circles, carved symbols in the caves. Things that suggested the area had been inhabited long before any human settlement. Margot lifted a peculiar brass instrument from one of the crates. It looked like a compass, but instead of a traditional needle, it had a crystal pointer that seemed to capture and refract light in impossible ways. The moment her fingers touched it, Eliza's medallion blazed with blue light, and the compass crystal began spinning wildly before settling on a direction that definitely wasn't magnetic north. Found it, Margot breathed. Mrs. Abernathy blinked in surprise. Oh my, it's never done that before. We always assumed it was broken. Not broken, Eliza said, carefully taking the compass from her mother. Just waiting for the right time. The crystal pointer was aiming steadily toward the Ramtops, but not at the peaks. It pointed to something beyond them, in a direction that hurt to think about too carefully. Mrs. Abernathy, Robert said carefully, do you have any records about who donated this compass? Let me check. She consulted a ledger that looked older than the building itself. Ah, here it is. Donated in 1987 by the estate of Marcus Holloway. He was quite the local character, claimed to be a guardian of the threshold, whatever that meant. Eliza's blood ran cold. Guardian of the threshold? Oh yes, he was quite insistent about it. Lived alone in a cabin up near Crystal Cave, always going on about protecting the boundaries and keeping the world separate. Most people thought he was harmless, if eccentric. Is he still alive? Theo asked. Oh no, dear. Passed away about 15 years ago. But. Mrs. Abernathy lowered her voice conspiratorially, his cabin is still there. Never could get anyone to buy the property. People say strange things happen there, lights in the windows, sounds like someone walking around. Probably just teenagers, but. The compass crystal pulsed brighter, and through the basement windows, they could see the aurora lights over the Ramtops beginning to appear even in daylight. We need to go to that cabin, Eliza said. Tonight. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Abernathy called out, oh, wait. I almost forgot. She rummaged through another box and pulled out a worn leather journal. This belonged to Marcus as well. Never could make heads or tails of it, written in some kind of code. Eliza opened the journal, and her enhanced eyes immediately recognized the symbols. They were the same ones she'd learned in the Threshold realm. I can read this, she said quietly. The first entry, when translated, made her heart race. Day 1247 since my return from the other side. The beings there spoke truth. I am now bound to guard the crossing points, to ensure the barriers hold. But I am not alone. There are others like me, scattered across the world, each protecting a fragment of the Great Seal. The compass points to each fragment in turn. When all are gathered, the seal can be renewed. But if they fall into the wrong hands, or if a guardian fails in their duty, the consequences will echo across both realms. I have hidden the first key here in New Ankh. The second lies where earth meets sky. The third rests beneath still waters. The fourth waits in the heart of the great machine. And the fifth travels with the last guardian who will come. Eliza looked up from the journal, her face pale. I understand now. Marcus Holloway was like me, someone who crossed over and returned. He spent his life guarding one of the crossing points. And now he's dead, Robert said grimly. Which means the crossing point he was guarding is unprotected. Eliza closed the journal. That's why the barriers are failing. The Guardian network is breaking down. Outside, thunder crashed despite the clear sky, and the aurora lights pulsed more intensely. The cabin, Margot said. If Marcus hid something there. Then we need to find it before the Bureau does. Eliza checked the compass. Its crystal was now pointing directly at the Ramtops, but as they watched, the direction began to shift slightly eastward. It's not just pointing to the cabin, Theo observed. It's moving. Because the artifacts are calling to each other, Eliza realized. The closer we get to one, the easier it becomes to find the others. As they climbed the stairs to leave the historical society, Mrs. Abernathy called after them one last time. "Be careful up there, dears. Especially tonight." "Why tonight specifically?" Margot asked. "Because tonight is when Marcus died. 15 years ago to the day. And every year on this date, the lights around his cabin burn brighter than anywhere else in the Ramtops." Eliza's medallion grew warm against her skin. "He's still there," she whispered. "Not alive, but not gone either. He's been waiting." "Waiting for what?" Theo asked. "For the next guardian to take his place." As they walked out into the afternoon light, the compass crystal spun once more before settling on a new direction, one that led directly to the old cabin, and to whatever Marcus Holloway had been protecting all these years. Behind them, Mrs. Abernathy locked the Historical Society's doors, unaware that she had just set in motion events that would determine the fate of two worlds. In the distance, something that might have been singing echoed from the mountains, growing stronger as the day faded toward night. Ancient Awakening. The path to Marcus Holloway's cabin wound through terrain that seemed to shift in the periphery of vision. Eliza led the way, her medallion serving as both compass and warning system, its blue glow intensifying whenever they approached areas where the dimensional barriers were particularly thin. "Stay close," she warned her family. "The boundaries are unstable here. If you see something that doesn't look right, don't stare at it directly." Theo ignored the advice immediately, fascinated by a tree whose leaves appeared to be growing downward. "Whoa, look at." "Theo, no." Eliza grabbed his arm just as the tree began to flicker between existing and not existing. "That's a reality echo. Looking too long can trap your consciousness in a feedback loop." The cabin, when they finally reached it, was exactly what they'd expected and nothing like they'd imagined. It appeared solid and normal from one angle, but when they moved, it seemed to exist in several dimensions at once, with rooms visible through walls that should have blocked the view. "How do we get inside?" Robert asked, studying the structure with his augmented reality glasses. "My scanner is showing at least 12 different architectural configurations." "We don't force our way in," Eliza said, approaching the front door. "We ask permission." She placed her hand on the door and spoke in the otherworldly language she'd learned in the Threshold realm. The door shimmered and solidified into a single, normal-looking entrance. Inside, the cabin was a museum of interdimensional artifacts. Maps covered the walls, not of Earth, but of the spaces between worlds. Instruments unlike anything they'd ever seen sat on tables, some still humming with energy. And in the center of the main room, sitting in a chair as if waiting for visitors, was Marcus Holloway. Or rather, what remained of him. "He's not dead," Eliza said softly. "Not exactly. He's become part of the Guardian network itself." Marcus's translucent form looked up as they entered, his eyes focusing with difficulty. "Finally," he said, his voice echoing from multiple directions. "I was beginning to think you'd never arrive." "You've been waiting for us?" Margot asked, trying not to stare at the way Marcus seemed to fade in and out of visibility. "Waiting for her," Marcus pointed at Eliza. "The next guardian. The barriers have been failing since I began my transition. I needed someone to take my place, but it had to be someone who had already crossed over and returned." "What happened to you?" Eliza approached carefully, her medallion resonating with the energy surrounding Marcus. "I held the crossing point here for 47 years. But maintaining the barriers takes its toll. Eventually, you become so connected to the network that you can't fully exist in just one dimension anymore." Marcus stood, his form becoming more solid with effort. "But before I complete the transition, I need to pass on what I've learned." He gestured to the maps on the walls. "The Great Seal isn't just about keeping the world separate. It's about maintaining balance. Your dimension is young, chaotic, constantly growing and changing. The Threshold realm is ancient, stable, nearly static. Without the barriers, your world's chaos would consume theirs, but their stasis would freeze yours. What about the other artifacts?" Robert asked, studying one of the interdimensional maps. Scattered, as the journal said. But the compass will find them, it's already begun. Marcus pointed to a device in the corner that looked like a hybrid between a radio and a telescope. The Watchers have been monitoring dimensional stability across the globe. 3 of the 5 artifacts have already been disturbed. Disturbed how? Theo asked. The Bureau of Terrestrial Anomalies isn't the only organization aware of the barriers. There are groups in other countries, other governments, all trying to study or exploit the crossing points. Each time they probe or experiment, they weaken the network further. Eliza moved to the strange device, and it responded to her presence by displaying a holographic map of the world. Red dots pulsed at various locations, some steady, some flickering. The steady red marks are stable crossing points with active guardians, Marcus explained. The flickering ones are locations where the guardian has died or been compromised. There were far too many flickering dots. How many guardians are left? Margot asked, though she dreaded the answer. Including Eliza, possibly 6 worldwide. A century ago, there were hundreds. Marcus's form was becoming more translucent. The modern world doesn't leave much room for people who disappear for years at a time or live as hermits protecting incomprehensible cosmic forces. So what do we do? Eliza asked. You take my place here, and your family helps you gather the artifacts. But know this, becoming a guardian isn't reversible. You'll be tied to this location, this crossing point, for the rest of your extended life. Eventually, you'll face the same choice I'm facing now. The weight of this statement settled on the family like a physical force. Eliza was quiet for a long moment, her hand on the medallion. What happens if I don't? If we can't gather all the artifacts? Marcus waved his hand, and the holographic map changed, showing a simulation of dimensional barriers collapsing. Cities flickered between realities, people vanished and reappeared changed, and vast sections of landscape became impossible geometric puzzles. Within 6 months, both worlds become uninhabitable. Within a year, both collapse entirely. Outside the cabin, the aurora lights had grown so bright they cast shadows even through the walls. The singing they'd heard earlier was now clearly audible, a chorus of voices from the threshold realm, calling across the dimensional divide. The acceleration is increasing, Marcus noted. Your return to this world has triggered the final phase. The network recognizes that a new guardian is present, and it's trying to complete the transition before it's too late. How long do we have? Robert asked. To gather all 5 artifacts and perform the renewal. Perhaps a week. Maybe less. Eliza looked at her family, her parents, her brother, all the normal life she had hoped to return to. Then she looked at the map with its flickering red dots, each one representing a failing barrier between worlds. I'll do it, she said quietly. I'll become the guardian. Eliza, no, Margot started, but her daughter held up a hand. Mom, I've already been changed by my time in the threshold realm. I can never fully belong to just one world again. At least this way, the change serves a purpose. Marcus smiled, the first truly warm expression they'd seen from him. Spoken like a true guardian. But first, you need to understand what you're truly committing to. He gestured to another device, and suddenly they were all standing in the threshold realm itself, or at least, experiencing it as Marcus had learned to do. Towering crystal structures reached toward a sky filled with multiple moons, and beings of living light moved through the landscape with purpose beyond human understanding. This is what you'll be protecting, Marcus said. Both this world and your own. They're beautiful in different ways, and they both deserve to survive. As the vision faded, Eliza's medallion pulsed with renewed energy, and the compass in her hand spun to point toward their next destination. The second artifact, Marcus said. It waits where Earth meets sky. But be warned, others are seeking it as well, and they won't hesitate to stop you. The aurora lights outside flashed brighter, and somewhere in the distance, they could hear the sound of helicopters approaching. The Bureau, Robert said grimly. Then we'd better hurry, Eliza replied, checking the compass one more time. Where Earth meets sky, any ideas? Theo grinned despite the gravity of the situation. I know exactly where that is. The radio tower on Mount Beacon. It's the highest point in the region, and there's an old legend that it was built on a sacred site. Then that's where we go, Eliza said, turning to Marcus one last time. Will you be all right? I'll hold the barriers here as long as I can. But Eliza, once you begin the Guardian trials, there's no turning back. Make sure this is truly what you want before you take the final steps. As they prepared to leave, Marcus called out one last warning. Remember, the artifacts were scattered to prevent their misuse. Some of them are protected by guardians of their own, beings that won't distinguish between those who would save the worlds and those who would destroy them. The helicopter sounds were getting closer, and through the cabin's windows, they could see searchlights beginning to sweep the mountainside. Time to go, Eliza said, and led her family out into the night, toward whatever waited for them where Earth meets sky. New beginnings. The radio tower on Mount Beacon stood silhouetted against the aurora-filled sky like a steel sentinel. Eliza and her family had managed to evade the Bureau's search helicopters by taking old mining paths that Theo had discovered during his geological surveys for school projects. There, Theo pointed as they crested the final ridge. The transmission station. But look at the base of the tower. Where the tower's foundation met the rocky peak, strange symbols glowed with the same blue light as Eliza's medallion. The compass in her hand was spinning frantically, its crystal pointer blazing like a small star. It's here, she breathed. The second artifact. But they weren't alone. Bureau vehicles surrounded the tower's base, and agents in environmental suits were carefully examining the glowing symbols with instruments that sparked and failed as soon as they got too close. They can't understand what they're looking at, Robert observed through his augmented reality glasses. Their equipment isn't designed for interdimensional phenomena. Which makes them dangerous, Eliza said. They'll keep pushing, probing, until they break something that can't be fixed. As if summoned by her words, one of the Bureau agents called out excitedly. I'm getting coherent readings. Whatever's causing the luminescence is responding to electromagnetic stimulation. No, Eliza whispered, but it was too late. The agent had increased his scanner's power output, and the symbols on the tower's base flared blindingly bright. The aurora overhead pulsed in response, and for a terrifying moment, the sky seemed to tear like fabric. Through the rift, they could see the crystal spires of the threshold realm, and something was coming through. Everyone get back! Eliza shouted, but the Bureau agents were transfixed by their readings, unable to comprehend the danger. A being of pure energy descended through the tier, not malevolent, but ancient and utterly alien. Its voice resonated in harmonics that human ears weren't designed to process, speaking in the language Eliza had learned during her time in the other realm. The barriers weaken. The sacred sites are disturbed. Who calls to us across the void? Eliza stepped forward, her medallion blazing with responsive light. She replied in the same harmonic language, I am Eliza Thorne, chosen guardian of the crossing points. These people don't understand what they're doing. The being's attention focused on her, and she felt its consciousness brush against hers, vast, patient, but increasingly concerned. You speak our words, child of the chaotic realm. But you are untrained, and bonded to the network. How do you claim guardianship? Marcus Holloway sent me. The barriers are failing, and I've come to gather the artifacts of the Great Seal. The Bureau agents had finally noticed the impossible conversation taking place, and several were raising what appeared to be weapons designed for capturing energy phenomena. Do not, the being warned, its voice carrying across both dimensional frequencies. Your tools will only hasten the collapse. But human fear and scientific curiosity proved stronger than wisdom. The lead agent fired some kind of containment beam at the being, and the effect was catastrophic. The energy creature didn't just vanish, it was torn apart across multiple dimensions, its death scream echoing through realities. The tear in the sky widened, and through it poured chaotic energy that began transforming everything it touched. The second artifact. Eliza shouted over the dimensional storm. We have to find it before this gets worse. Her compass was spinning wildly, but as she approached the tower's base, she could see what the Bureau had missed. The symbols weren't just decorative, they formed a map, showing the location of something buried beneath the transmission equipment. Theo. Your geological scanner. Her brother pulled out his tablet, adjusting it for ground-penetrating analysis. There's a chamber directly under the tower's central support. Depth, 12 feet. Above them, the dimensional rift was spreading, and more energy was bleeding through. The Bureau agents were in full retreat, their equipment failing as reality became unstable around them. How do we get down there? Margot asked, as the ground beneath their feet began to show cracks that revealed glimpses of other worlds. We don't go down, Eliza realized, looking at her medallion. We bring it up. She pressed her hand to the central symbol on the tower's base and spoke the activation phrase Marcus had taught her. The symbols flared, and a pillar of stone rose from the earth, carrying with it an object that made all their previous artifacts look mundane. It was a sphere of crystallized starlight, containing what appeared to be a miniature galaxy that rotated slowly within its faceted surface. The moment it appeared, the dimensional rift began to stabilize, and the chaotic energy swirling around them found focus and direction. The stellar compass, she breathed. This is what points to the remaining artifacts. But as she reached for it, more figures emerged from the dimensional chaos, not energy beings this time, but humans. Or what had once been human. They wore the remnants of various military and scientific uniforms from different eras, but their forms flickered between dimensions, and their eyes held the madness of those who had seen too much. The Lost Ones, Robert said, recognizing them from Marcus's maps. People who crossed over but couldn't find their way back. The artifacts, their leader spoke, his voice layered with harmonics from multiple realities. They call to us across the void. We have searched so long. They're not hostile, Eliza realized. They're trying to get home. She lifted the stellar compass, and its inner galaxy pulsed with warm light. I can help you, she called to the Lost Ones. But first, I need to complete the Great Seal renewal. Will you help me? The lead Lost One stepped forward, his form solidifying slightly. You would trust us. We are no longer fully human. Neither am I, Eliza replied. But that doesn't mean we can't choose to protect what we love. The stellar compass responded to her acceptance, floating up from the stone pillar to hover in the space between her hands. Immediately, she could see the locations of the remaining 3 artifacts, one beneath the Pacific Ocean, one hidden in the heart of CERN's particle accelerator, and one. The 5th artifact, she whispered. It's not hidden somewhere else. It's been with me all along. She looked down at her medallion, understanding finally flooding through her. This isn't just a key or a translator. It's the final piece of the Great Seal, created when I first crossed between worlds. The Lost Ones nodded in unison. The Guardian's bond. Each crossing creates one, but only a true Guardian can activate its full power. Above them, the dimensional rift was beginning to close as the artifacts resonated with each other. But there was still work to be done. The ocean artifact first, Eliza decided. Then CERN. The stellar compass will guide us, but we'll need to move quickly. The longer the network remains incomplete, the more unstable everything becomes. Over the next 3 days, with the help of the Lost Ones and her family, Eliza retrieved the remaining artifacts. The ocean journey led them to an underwater city that existed only when viewed from the threshold realm. The CERN infiltration required her to phase partially between dimensions to reach the artifact hidden in the accelerator's quantum field. Each retrieval strengthened the network, but also changed Eliza further. By the time they returned to Marcus's cabin, she could see through multiple dimensions simultaneously, and her voice carried harmonics that resonated across realities. Are you ready? Marcus asked. He was barely visible now, more energy than matter. Eliza looked at her family, her parents, who had risked everything to help her, Theo, who had proven braver than any of them had expected, and the lost ones, who had found purpose in protecting the barriers they had once broken. I'm ready. The Great Seal renewal required her to merge all 5 artifacts with her own life force, becoming a living anchor point between worlds. As the process began, she felt herself expanding, her consciousness touching every crossing point in the network. She could sense the other guardians around the world, some human, some not, all dedicated to maintaining the balance between chaos and order, growth and stability. The transformation was not without cost. She would age more slowly now, and she would always be partially connected to the threshold realm. But she would also be able to travel instantly between crossing points, to communicate with beings from other dimensions, and to help maintain the peace between worlds. Will we see you again? Margot asked as the process completed and Eliza stood transformed, glowing softly with interdimensional energy. Every day, Eliza smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like the 16-year-old girl who had disappeared 3 years ago. I'm not leaving. I'm just expanding. She gestured, and suddenly they could all see what she saw, the network of light connecting crossing points around the world, the beauty of the threshold realm existing alongside their own reality, and the endless possibilities that existed when different worlds chose cooperation over conflict. The barriers will hold now, she said. And when others cross over, accidentally or otherwise, I'll be there to help them find their way home. Just like someone did for me. Marcus's form finally faded completely, but his voice lingered, well done, Guardian. The network is complete. In the months that followed, the aurora lights over the Ramtops became a permanent but gentle fixture, a reminder of the wonders that existed just beyond perception. The Bureau of Terrestrial Anomalies redirected their efforts toward cooperative research rather than exploitation, guided by advisors who understood the true nature of reality's boundaries. The lost ones found their way home at last, their forms stabilizing as the network's strength allowed them to choose their preferred reality. Some returned to fully human existence, while others became bridges between worlds, helping future travelers navigate the spaces between. And in New Ankh, life returned to its wonderfully ordinary extraordinariness, watched over by a guardian who had learned that the greatest adventures often begin with a simple choice, to help others find their way home. Eliza stood at her observation point each morning, no longer searching the mountains for signs of her missing daughter, but watching over all the children of both worlds, ensuring that the barriers between realities remained strong enough to protect, but permeable enough to allow wonder. The compass that had started their journey sat in the Historical Society's display case, its crystal pointer now steady and calm, pointing not toward dimensional rifts, but toward hope. And sometimes, just sometimes, visitors to New Ankh would catch glimpses of impossible things, crystal cities in the clouds, beings of living light walking among the trees, and a young woman who seemed to exist in multiple places at once, always ready to help those who had lost their way find the path back home. The end.